Good evening and welcome. My name is Wesley John and I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager for the Ivors Academy. The Ivors Academy is marking Holocaust Memorial Day this evening with a special discussion panel, Reflections of Creativity in Conflict. Our composer guests this evening all have Jewish heritage or have close associations with the Jewish community through their creative lives. I hope our event this evening will reveal a unique insight into the work of the creative lives of our panel of composers and how their Jewish heritage and identity has influenced their creativity and their music. The theme for events this year is Be the Light in the Darkness. And like many of the commemorations on this day, it is a time to reflect not only on the Holocaust as a gross act of genocide on the Jewish nation and its people, but also to acknowledge other recent and current events of genocide throughout the world. I'm delighted to be able to introduce our panel this evening, and of course, many of you will know our guests from their numerous compositions, performances, broadcasts, and recordings. Firstly, I want to introduce our host for this evening, the author, music critic, and librettist, Jessica Duchen. Jessica has written for the Jewish Chronicle, the Sunday Times, BBC Music Magazine, and several other arts and cultural publications. She has also written 9 books, including biographies of the composers Erich Korngold and Gabriel Fauré. As a librettist, she has worked extensively with our Ivors Academy member, Roxana Panufnik, with their People's Opera, Silver Birch, being nominated in the Educational and Outreach category of the International Opera Awards in 2018. Fighting injustice, the impact of war, and the struggle for women's equality have all been recurring themes for Jessica's work. We are very pleased to have her with us this evening. Now on to our composers. Sam Eastmond is a trumpeter, composer, and band leader of the awesome Spike Orchestra. This large ensemble is dedicated to performing experimental contemporary music and promoting everything that goes with it. Sam's Creative Composer Award nomination in 2020 in the large ensemble jazz category. Still making waves, Sam's compositions and dynamic performances by the Spike Orchestra have led the critic Lee Rice Epstein to remark that their recordings are dangerously delirious. Composer Erika Fox was born in Vienna, although her Hasidic rabbinical family roots are originally from the old Romanian town of Strojnic. In 1939, Erika and her family were forced to leave Vienna because of the Nazi regime in Austria, and so arrived in London as a refugee. Soon her musical talents began to be noticed, and she started to have piano lessons with Millicent Silver. This led to Erika being awarded a scholarship to study the piano with Angus Morrison at the Royal College of Music. But more notably, her flair for composition led to lessons with Bernard Stevens, Jeremy Dale Roberts, and Howson Birtwistle. Erika's achievements include the Finzi Award for her quartet Kaleidoscope and an Olivier Award nomination for her chamber opera, The Dancer Hotaki. Erika Fox is also a British Composer Award recipient and was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019. Ivor Novello Award nominee Debbie Wiseman, OBE, needs no introduction. Over the last 25 years, she has forged a stunning career in film and television, creating iconic signature themes and epic film scores. Her creativity has been rightly recognized with several industry awards. In 2018, Debbie Wiseman was appointed OBE for services to music, and in April 2019, she accepted the role of president of the charity Making Music, making her the first female president in the charity's history. Debbie is also patron of the charity Soundabout, which works with children with disabilities using music, rhythm, and sound to help them discover creative expression. Professor Nigel Osborne MBE is also a British Composer Award recipient, having been awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2017. He has held the role of Reed Professor of Music at Edinburgh University for over 20 years and describes himself simply as a composer, educator, and aid worker. However, his work in all these fields mark him out as an extraordinary human being. Professor Osborne has a long and distinguished career as a composer, working with major orchestras and opera houses around the world. In his aid work, Nigel Osborne has pioneered the use of music and the creative arts to support children who are victims of conflict throughout the world, especially in Eastern Europe, Africa, and India, and specifically in Bosnia, Lebanon, and Syria. Professor Osborne is still actively working as an aid worker and also currently is a volunteer for the NHS. Our last panelist this evening is Ruth Daniel. Ruth is the CEO of the global organization In Place of War. Ruth has personally developed and implemented hundreds of cultural programs in sites of conflict and economic deprivation around the world. Through her projects, Ruth and her team of changemakers have used creativity as a tool for positive change in several war-torn communities. The work of In Place of War has helped to transform prevailing cultures of violence and suffering, and has often turned humanitarian tragedies into positive stories of hope and healing. As the home of songwriters and composers in the UK, the Ivors Academy wants to especially remember the creative spirits of the many musicians and composers whose lives were taken during the Holocaust. The number of musicians and composers who perished in Nazi-run camps will never fully be known. However, we now take the time to remember just a handful and listen to some of their music. Composers such as James Simon, a student of Max Bruch, Pavel Hans Grasser, Victor Ullmann, a student of Arnold Schoenberger, and the songwriter Kurt Gören were all murdered in Auschwitz in 1944 under the Nazi regime. Details and credits of the following 5 tracks will appear in the chat box at the bottom of your screens. Thank you, Tarek.
am Pepicek, how are you? This is my sister Aninku, sorrow in every step we tread. Daddy died, Mommy sick in bed. Mommy called doctor, what's his name?
Higgledy piggledy in he came.
I am the doctor, I know best.
Put his cold ear on Mommy's breast. He laid a finger on his nose. Nobody knows how illness goes. She'll go to sleep, now children quick. Milk is the best thing for the sick.
Mama be sleeping, fetch it quick. Milk is the best thing for the sick.
Mommy is sleeping, fetch it quick. Milk will cure you if you're sick.
Denn ist in seinem Riesenpalast eingeschlossen, ganz allein, besser regieren zu können. Der Trommler, eine nicht ganz wirkliche Erscheinung, wie das Radio. Der Lautsprecher, den man nicht sieht, nur hört. Ein Soldat und ein Mädchen. Der Tod als abgedankter Soldat und Harlekin, der unter Tränen lachen kann, das ist das Leben. Das erste Bild spielt irgendwo. Tod und Harlekin sitzen im Ausgedingen. Das Leben, das nicht mehr lachen, und das Sterben, das nicht mehr weinen kann in einer Welt, die verlehnt hat, am Leben sich zu freuen, des Todes zu sterben. Hallo, hallo! Wir beginnen.
Eine Bark lief ein in der Haber, von Sydney kommen, nachts 11:03 Uhr. Es roch nach Himbeeressig am Kai und nach Hundekadaver. Huddeldaddeldu ging ans Land. Die Rue Albani war ihm bekannt, er kannte nahezu alle Hafenplätze. Weil vor dem ersten Hause ein Mädchen stand, holte er sich im ersten Haus die Krätze, weil er das aber natürlich nicht gleich empfand. Ging er weiter, kreuzte verblasst auf weiter Fahrt. 18 Monate vorher hatte er sich zusammengespart.
Thank you, Tarek. It would be wonderful to listen to more of their wonderful music, as it's so varied and interesting. But we do have our own panel of composers this evening. If you do want to listen and investigate further, please look at the website holocaustmusic.ort.org, where there is a wonderful resource of music and information. Well, that's enough of me talking for this evening. I'm delighted to welcome our panel this evening, Sam Eastmond, Erika Fox, Debbie Wiseman OBE, Professor Nigel Osborne MBE, Ruth Daniel, and of course, our host for this evening, the author and music critic, Jessica Duchen.
Thank you so much, Wesley. Very good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this very special discussion. It's a great, great privilege to be your host for the evening. As you can see, we have an absolutely remarkable lineup of speakers, and we'll be looking together from everyone's different angles at the various roles that music has played and can play in the moments of great trauma and anguish in our recent and current history, and whether it really does have the power to bring people together, to heal us individually and collectively, and perhaps even how we can harness that unique power to build a better and more humane world. Only by understanding what happened in the Holocaust and keeping alive the memory of this vast destruction can we recognize the possibility that genocide can happen again and take steps in whatever way we possibly can to prevent it. I'm going to speak to each of our panelists in turn. And as Wesley mentioned, do pop any questions that you have in the audience into the chat box. And then Wesley will be collecting those and we'll come to them at the end. Now, I'd like to plunge straight in with our first amazing panelist, the composer, bandleader, and trumpet player, Sam Eastmond. His work, The Pink Shagpile Carpet Story, aka The King of Spank from Splintered Stories, was nominated for an Ivor Novello Award in the large ensemble jazz category in 2020. We're going to hear a little extract from it first. It's called Here and Now, H-E-A-R, that is. Thanks very much. Sam, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us this evening. Tell us about what we've just been listening to. What inspired this work? Where does it come from? What does it mean to you?
So since 2014, I've really been working mostly in radical Jewish culture, which is a movement, a taxonomic bracket coined by the great composer John Zorn. It's the idea of what is Jewish music, what constitutes Jewish music, you know. So if we take for a starting point that not all composers who are Jewish write Jewish music, and if we take away klezmer and cantorial music and Yiddish theatre, what are we left with? What can we make? So it's a contemporary cultural idea of Jewishness within music. Now, of course, it's very Jewish. There are no answers. There are only questions. So everyone's definition of this is slightly different. I work mostly with a big band. So I tend to have things like Ellingtonian-esque or Gil Evans thrown at me. I mean, that piece goes to some places later on that are a little more crazy. But that piece in itself comes from the New Music Biennial 2019 commission, from the PRS Foundation and JW3, who I worked with. And that's not the piece that was that. I went around the country and did so much research, listening to British Jews tell me their stories, tell me their grandfather's stories or their grandmother's stories. And I just had so much that I wanted to write about as a result of just sitting down with different people, that a whole album came out of it rather than just a 15-minute commission. And I wanted to make sure I spoke to a vast swathe of Jewishness. There is no one single idea of what is or isn't a Jew, or one straight ahead, this is defining. There are things that hold us together and things that we argue about, and we do a lot of arguing. So I made sure that I listened to people from all over the spectrums, from all over the many spectrums. I think the first time when I sat down with JW3 and they were hooking me up with people, I said I wanted some very orthodox people because they weren't naturally in my circle, and I wanted some drag artists because that's what I start. I think if you've got, you know, poetry and drag artists, you can start building a civilization, generally speaking. So I also, when I started this commission, I said, you know, I don't want to write about politics and I don't want to write about anti-Semitism. There's a clip, I think, coming up later where I wrote about the Shoah. I've written about anti-Semitism. I want to write about how fantastic it is being a Jew, about the myriad Jewish experience, about all these wonderful things. And every single person I sat down with, from London up to Harlem, back down again, was the extent of my travel. Every single person unprompted talks about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a part of every Jewish life, one way or another, whether it impacts daily, consciously, or whether it impacts unconsciously, whether it's overt or whether it's microaggressions. It's there and it's part of our existence. And everyone spoke about it. And I was faced then with a choice. Do I leave out this thing that I said I didn't want to write about because I felt I'd written about it a lot? Or do I find a way to bring it in? And Here and Now is the piece where I talk about anti-Semitism, and specifically anti-Semitism and conspiracy fantasy. People that are more polite than me would call it conspiracy theory. I give the types of conspiracy fantasy that are peddled about Jews and other minorities and as a tool to any group of people. I don't give them the respect of calling it a theory. It's not scientific. So it's about conspiracy fantasy. It's about anti-Semitism. It's about the dual narratives of anti-Semitism. Jews are the rich elites controlling everything, the puppeteers. They are also the cockroaches crawling into the country and infecting it and bringing it down. So that piece has lots of lines that twist and don't quite fit together, lots of subtly dissonant things and lots of very overtly dissonant things. I think that answers the first question. What was it? Hello?
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm very interested that you're tackling these themes in your genre in particular, because I think we tend to associate classical compositions more with memorializing the Jewish past. And I wondered what sort of hinterland you have for these topics in the jazz scene.
Well, I mean, like I said, I wrote a whole album about the Shoah, and I felt I sort of had to deal with that first, maybe, before I could write about Jewishness now. And in terms of, I don't know, anti-Semitism and conspiracy fantasy are everywhere. I have people in my circle who have said things to me that, you know, maybe I'll look at them like that and we'll have a conversation. Maybe we won't. I know that when I stopped doing what other people describe as jazz, and I started doing what I would describe as radical Jewish culture, some places were less interested in talking to me. There are instances where I've been asked to write about my own music, and someone has gone through with the editor's scalpel and removed the word Jewish. Every time it occurred, as if to separate the inception from the work. But again, it's, you know, anti-Semitism is something that I experience one way or another most days. It's not something in the past. It's something very much in the present. You know, if you look around you, in the last few years even, we've had Pittsburgh, we've had events in Paris and Belgium, we've had people marching with torches, chanting "the Jews will not replace us" in Charlottesville. This is not something that happened in the past that we should memorialize. This is something that needs fighting about. And I used to think, you know, when I was a lot younger and a lot more angry. I'm still angry, but I don't have the energy to be quite as fiery all the time. But I used to think that we could beat anti-Semitism, that if we found the right arguments, that if we said the right things, we could beat it. I don't think that anymore. I think it's here. I think what we have to do is we have to fight it. And I think, you know, the reason why I chose to write about conspiracy fantasy particularly was that genocides and murder and acts of violence don't start with acts of violence. We don't begin with jackboots marching down the Champs-Élysées, we begin with words, we begin with ideas that people are not people, that they are somehow not quite as much of a person as us, that if we can dehumanize this group of people, we can treat them less well. And it starts with that, and we see it all the time. We, you know, not to get too political, but we saw it a lot in the last 4 years in the States. We saw the gaslighting and the dog whistling, and the thing about anti-Semitism is it's quite often a feeling as much as an overt act, certainly in its infancy. You know, we're talking here in the United Kingdom, in Britain, the home of the blood libel, or the home of the contemporary blood libel from the 12th or 13th century. So a lot of the time when people talk to me about anti-Semitism, they don't quite understand why it's not always overt aggression, why it's sometimes little microaggressions, why it's sometimes just people letting you know that you don't quite belong here, or that you are different. And I think that's dangerous. And I think, you know, I certainly have sat in my spaces, in bands and in synagogue, and I have challenged things that I think are questionable from people in my community. And I think that's the first step you need to take. That if you are only fighting anti-Semitism when it manifests in places you already disagree with, you're not fighting anti-Semitism. You're using anti-Semitism as a tool to hurt the people that you don't like. But everyone has unconscious bias. This has been in the news a lot over over the period of lockdown. We've quite rightly been centering Black voices and Black achievements in the arts. And, you know, there's a thing there with privilege and with ideas of Jewish identity that a lot of the time, you know, I pass for white. I pick a fight about anti-Semitism. I'm choosing to pick a fight. I don't have to get involved. But we're talking about the Shoah tonight, and we're talking specifically about 6 million Jews murdered precisely because they weren't considered white. So I think we have to examine it, and we have to listen.
So the next piece of yours that we're going to hear is it's from your piece Ghetto. It's called Uprising. Tell us about how this came into being.
So, like I said, when we started working with radical Jewish culture, and when we thought about the first Spike Orchestra album, writing about the Shoah almost felt like an obligation before being able to celebrate, because Jews are very serious about things. We don't celebrate our holidays, we observe them. You know, we commemorate, we remember, and radical Jewish culture is really all about celebration. But I needed to find a way to observe, to talk about the Shoah in a way that wasn't just memorializing, that wasn't just relentlessly dour and grim. And so we wrote about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, because there's many things, but there's a narrative there. You can write a flow, you can write 10 movements that have an arc to it. And actually, just as a side note, the last performance I did before lockdown, the first time round, back last February, was the last time I played in public, was at the Holocaust Survivor Centre in North London. And it was for the memorial of Sam Fryman, may his memory be a blessing, who escaped from the Warsaw Ghetto as a child, was later interned in, I think, 4 camps, and made it over here after the war. And it was requested we play, I got together a little trumpet trio. It was requested we play Zognik Kainmol, which is a partisan song. And we played that, and we were in the Holocaust Survivor Center, and we were surrounded by, you know, some old people, you know, tiny little people at the back of the room, very old. And I was playing, and I'm just feeling like this means something, I want to play it right. And then coming back towards me, their voices singing this song that obviously still held so much meaning to them, was one of the most beautiful and moving things I've ever experienced. And I'm still not sure how you can cry and play a trumpet at the same time, but I managed it at that point. And Ghetto really is about that. It's about those people. And I very specifically within Ghetto, it's all about the Jews. It's all about Warsaw Ghetto. It's all about the Nazis are not involved. I couldn't write about Nazis, because what can you say? So this is the story of, or a story of a idea of a narrative of the Warsaw Ghetto.
Okay, so if Tariq, can we have the next extract, please? Thank you very much. That was from Sam Eastman's Ghetto. Sam, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and more power to your elbows. Is incredibly powerful and stirring music. I think your work is seriously significant, and I look forward to exploring it a great deal more in the future. So I'd like to move now to rural Wales, where the extraordinary composer Erika Fox is, I believe, holed up more or less for the duration of lockdown. Erika, can you hear me okay? Erika?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good, wonderful.
From time to time, I can hear you. From time to time, I'm afraid, and so did Sam, but not too badly. So we're all right, I think, you know.
Great. Well, welcome. Thank you for being with us tonight. It's a great honor to have you here, even so far away as you are. I wondered if you could tell us about your family background, first of all, because you escaped the Holocaust with your family from Vienna as a small child. Please, could you tell us how you got out and how you came to Britain?
Well, with some of my family, that is, not all of my family, of course, because there were members of my family who were not lucky enough to get out. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Right. Yes. So actually, I was the last one left in Vienna with my mother. A few members of my family got out because my father managed to get some false papers, forged papers, in fact. And so some people managed to come. And we were the last, my mother and I. And there was, it's interesting because I'm thinking about a certain relationship with what we experience now, because there was a kind of underlying fear, and children, particularly small children, don't know why they're afraid, but they're very attuned to the atmosphere around them, of course. And there was that fear of something that I didn't understand. And in a way, there is a sort of fear now of something that we can't see, but we can fall ill with it, of course, and die. there is a certain something that has made me remember that. It's interesting, really. But anyway, we got here, my mother and I was apparently not on her passport, so I didn't actually have the right to be here. But there was a very nice air hostess, and she said to my mother, hand her to me. And she gave me, you know, she held me, and they turned a blind eye and let me through. So that's how I got here. When we arrived, we came to a kind of house for Jewish refugees in the East End of London. But eventually we ended up in a house in Swiss Cottage where my grandfather, who was my mother's father, who was a rabbi, we had a synagogue in our house. It was called Bet Shalom, which means the house of peace. And so we it wasn't a synagogue like the big ones you get in London and elsewhere. It was what we actually called a stiebel, which was really just a room where prayers were said. And because we were a Hasidic family, there was a lot of music, not instrumental music, but singing and indeed dancing of a sort, you know. I don't know if you've ever seen films of Hasidic people kind of dancing around, you know. It's not dancing in couples. It's men, usually men together and women together, but in our house really it was only the men. But I was allowed in because I was only a little girl, and my grandfather was very fond of me, and he let me come into the men's room, as it were, to take part. So in a way, my music stems from that early time. That's how I hear music, and for a long time in my early life, that was really my only music, and it has had a big influence on the music I write now, even though for a long time I was not aware of that at all. I came to be aware of it when I was once asked to give a talk about my music, and I looked at it and studied it in a way from outside, as it were, and I sort of realized my Jewishness, which I had rather negated in a way, but there it was, and it was inescapable, really.
We're going to hear an extract of one of your pieces called, it's from your album Paths. It's called Where the Mourners Tread, Paths Where the Mourners Tread. Can you tell us something about that first, please?
Well, the title comes from one line in a poem by Philip Larkin. I suppose a lot of my music actually has a kind of, I won't say mourning, but it is a kind of farewell in a way. Yes, that's true. So I wrote it, well, it has a double dedication, actually. It is dedicated to a good friend of mine, the New Zealand composer Gillian Whitehead, who was a very close friend and lived with us for some time. And in a way taught me a lot about how to work. The single-mindedness that one needs and sometimes finds very difficult, as a woman and a mother. So it's partly dedicated to her, but partly to the memory of my father, whom I didn't know for a long time. He left Vienna in 1938 and went to Palestine and was in the British Army in Palestine. And I didn't know him till he came to London in 1948. Anyway, when he died, this piece is, I don't know what I can really tell you about it. It is just, I suppose, partly a memory of the liturgical chants that I remember as a small child, hearing my grandfather. And so a lot of my music is not harmonically thought about it. I think in lines. I think very much melodically, and they are. It's just a lot of lines together. That's, I think, all I can say about it. I'm not sure what to say about it.
Great. Well, let's hear a bit of it. So, Tariq, please, can we have Erika's extract? Thank you very much. I'm curious to know, Erika, do you feel that music can play a role in healing where trauma is concerned, whether it's as a creator or for your listeners? Do you think there's a role for it there?
I'm really sorry, you froze a bit of that time. Could you possibly repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm wondering what your view is of music as a means towards healing, and whether you feel it has played a role for you in that respect.
Most definitely. I can't even emphasize that too much. In a way, for me, music plays the part that religion sometimes plays for other people, because although I come from a very orthodox family, I'm not a religious person, but music, I remember Sarah Rogers saying, music is why we get up in the morning. And as far as I'm concerned, that is a fact.
That's wonderful.
And I think it can heal. Sorry.
No, go on, please.
I think it heals when you listen, and it heals when you play, and it heals when you write. It is the most extraordinary good fortune we have, really. It's a wonderful thing, yes.
Yeah, and you're writing a piano concerto now, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us anything about that at the moment, or is it a bit early in the process?
Well, I have written quite a lot of it. Actually, I hope I've overcome a gremlin, because this concerto has had a number of births. I'm writing it for Julian Jacobson and the BBC Scottish Orchestra. And I had promised Julian a concerto many, many years ago. And for some reason, I kept starting it and it didn't happen. But it is going to happen now.
Great.
I have written, I think it's going to be in 2 movements, and it's going to have the slow movement as the second movement, and without a third movement, as it were. I have written quite a lot of it, but I am finding it very difficult here also, because it's been almost a year, just about a year, since I've been here very isolated. And although I like isolation in a way, and you need it for work, this has been too much, really. You know, and I've missed my family and so on. But anyway, I am writing it, and I'm trying to write it as much away from the piano as I can, because one of the difficulties for me has been the fact that I'm not a brilliant pianist. And also, as I said before, I think in lines rather than harmonically. And so it's been quite difficult to work with a piano as the main instrument. But I think it's going to happen this time.
Great.
Yes, it is, definitely.
Yeah. Well, we look forward very, very much to hearing it in due course when all this so-called is over and we can assemble once again and be together to celebrate music. Erika, thank you so much. Don't go away. Please stay with us while we continue. I'd like to move over.
Of course I won't. Of course.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Erika. It's been wonderful to have you here. I'd like to move on now to the one and only Debbie Wiseman, who many of you listening tonight will know from her fantastic film music for everything really from the Andrew Marr Show to Wolf Hall, which was an absolutely extraordinary contemporary music reimagining of the world of the inner world really of Thomas Cromwell. Debbie, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jessica. It's lovely to be here.
Great. So yeah, Debbie, you're from a Jewish background as well. I'm wondering if there are specific ways in which you feel that the history of the Holocaust has affected you as a person and indeed as a musician.
Yes, I am from a Jewish family, although only my brother became an observant Jew. The rest of my family were not particularly observant in any way, shape or form. And I wasn't either, but I do have a very, very observant brother. And in terms of it inspiring the work, it's funny how you only think about it at times where you're asked to write something in a particular style. And many, many years ago, I was asked to write the music for the Museum of the Diaspora, which is the museum when you go to Israel and you go to Tel Aviv, there's this wonderful museum, and you're invited to go and watch a video, a 20-minute video about the history of the Jews. And I was asked to write the music for this video of the history of the Jews. And alongside the video was a script that arrived, and I popped it on the piano, and it told the story. And the music that I wrote had to accompany this story. So it's 20 minutes of music that told the story. And I've been working on a couple of different projects at the time, films and all sorts of different commercial projects. And then I was asked to write this. And I have to say, the music came so completely naturally and so easily and so fluently that as I was starting to write, I couldn't quite believe that it was coming so naturally. And I didn't have any problems writing finding the harmonic language, finding the melodies, finding the orchestration, all flowed very naturally. I wrote it in breakneck speed. I think I wrote it in a couple of weeks, delivered it to the producer of the project, and they then have been showing it now, and it's still running in this museum. And I was talking to my brother about it afterwards, and my husband, thinking, gosh, that was just one of the most easy, most natural projects. And there's something about the fact that there must have been something in my DNA and my makeup, something there that made writing this music very easy and very natural. I have no idea why. I don't find writing all music particularly easy, some stars more than others, but that was. So maybe it's just something that's in your DNA, you know, you find and you use when you have to. I don't use it, I don't find I have to use it. I write music for the project that I've been asked to write music for, but there was something special about that, and I was very proud of it.
Right, I think we've got an extract of it. Can we have a little bit of this piece by Debbie for Museum of Diaspora? So this is very evocative, very characteristically Jewish feeling music.
Yes, I mean, I wrote, you know, when I was talking to the lovely team at the Ivors Academy, and they said, oh, have you got any of that music? I wrote it such a long time ago, probably about 20 years ago, and I managed to find it on an old show reel that I had from years ago, and managed to dig out, that was the end credits, I think, a minute or something, the end credits, where they just roll everybody that's been involved in the film, in the making of it. So now it feels, you know, to me now as I'm listening, it's music from a very, very long time ago. But yes, of course, the melody has got that naturally very traditional, you know, the violin, the minor key, the intervals that you use that make you think that it is a melody, a Jewish melody. But who knows? You know, it was just the way it flowed was very natural, and even though, yes, it was a long, long time ago now.
Well, let's jump into what you're doing at the moment, because this next film that I believe you're working on is not without controversy. This is a sort of biopic of Roald Dahl, the great children's author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach. He's actually been in the news quite a lot recently because apparently his daughter has had to apologize publicly for his anti-Semitism. And I reckon that this must have certain, I'm just interested in how this side of Roald Dahl has impacted on you when you're involved in the project, and how you felt about writing for it, and just how you've come to that through the story and through the music itself.
Well, I have to say, Jessica, that this film doesn't touch on this at all. The story of To Olivia is about Roald Dahl during the writing of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and the relationship with his wife, Patricia Neal. And Hugh Bonneville plays Roald Dahl brilliantly, and Keeley Hawes plays Patricia Neal. And they lost a child. They lost their Olivia. And it's a story of what's interesting to me, and what was interesting in terms of this whole discussion, is that they had this terrible tragedy in their life, and they lost their adored child at the time of writing. And he was in the middle of writing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And what the film explores is how, through grief and through loss, you manage to still create and be creative and come through somehow. And the almost impossible grief that a parent would go through losing a child, and how on earth could he continue finding ways to be creative after that. And the film explores that. And that was very, very interesting. Now, at the end of, I've actually finished the score now. It's released in February the 19th. And so the music was actually recorded during the first lockdown, after the first lockdown had eased and the studios were allowed to open again for a short time. And we managed to get in and record with a socially distanced orchestra. And it was wonderful to do. But that's what the film studies and looks at, is how through the 5 stages of grief, and you do notice, you do feel Roel go through the 5 stages of grief, and how he comes out the other end and creates this remarkable piece of work, and how Patricia Neal went on to win an Oscar for her work as an actress, and through getting through grief. So there are parallels there. The family have come out since and apologized for the comments that Roel made, and I was, incredibly pleased that they did that, of course. But the film doesn't touch on it at all. But it is a beautifully made film directed by John Hay, who I've worked with many, many times, and I was thrilled to work with him on this. And the 2 lead performances of Roel and his wife Patricia are quite remarkable, with Hugh Bonneville and Keeley Hawes. So yeah, I hope you get to see it at some point.
It's a very universal story, the question of healing through creation.
Yeah, it really is, and it really touches on that, because at the end of the film, he has this remarkable success with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, having worked through this incredible grief and pain and trauma that he went through, and yet at the end comes out with this remarkable piece of work. And I suppose that, there is a wonderful resolution in that. There's a wonderful release through creativity, and sort of what Erika and Sam was saying about how they find ways of being creative in their own ways. I think we all have that. We all find ways of being creative, especially at the moment. We're all distanced, we're all struggling to find ways to stay in touch and be creative. So there are parallels, as Erika said. Now we are fearful of what's going on. We don't know what the future holds at the moment for any of us. Every day is a bit of a challenge for us all. But I find personally being able to be creative, having the wonder of music, being able to play the piano, be able to write music, is the most incredible gift to have. And I'm hugely grateful for it. And anybody who has music in their lives in any way is fortunate. You don't have to be a composer, you don't have to be a musician. Be able to enjoy music, particularly at the moment, it's been a great source of comfort, I think, for many people. And that's very, very important. That we have music in our lives in some way is a fantastic gift.
Absolutely. I think we're lucky enough to have a little sneak preview of your score for To Olivia. Tariq, can we have a little bit of this extract, please? Well, thank you very much, Debbie. It's lovely to have you here to talk to us today. And February the 19th, you said, is release date.
Yeah, that's a release date. I mean, they're hoping it's going to get into cinemas. Who knows? Released by Sky Cinema. So if the cinemas are open, it'll be in cinemas. If not, it'll be on everybody's TVs at home.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to move now on to someone who actually, to me, rather encapsulates what this evening is all about how creativity and music can be a light in the darkness. In some ways, the work I've seen of Nigel Osborne strikes me that, Nigel, you almost are that light in the darkness. I was lucky enough to come with you to Bosnia about 12 or 13 years ago now, possibly even longer, as time flies, to see some of the work that you were doing there with the healing power of music to work with traumatized children after the Bosnian War. So very warm welcome to you. Thank you for being with us, and tell us where you've been recently, because I hear you've been working with Syrian refugees in Lebanon.
Yes, well, thank you. First of all, it's lovely to be here and honored to be in this company. Some wonderful music. Thank you. Yes, at the moment, Bosnia was for me probably the beginning of my work, developing work with children in conflict. That was now 30 years ago. And what happened was it then sort of grew quite naturally. I was then invited to work in various places. I've never invited myself. I usually wait to be invited. I was invited and ended up in Kosovo, Chechnya, East Africa, India, and currently in the Middle East. And I'm working in Lebanon, a little bit in Syria, in the Bekaa Valley, with Syrian refugee children. I mean, in dreadful conditions. It's now been 8 years in those camps, in tents made of, cardboard, tarpaulin and chewing gum. A totally neglected community. So working there with children, and I'm a little bit concerned at the moment because I haven't been able to go there. And I'm hoping to get there soon. I'm afraid things may have slipped back a bit with the children. I hope not, because we got them somewhere. And it was good to get them to that place. I don't care about having to do it all over again. That's not the issue. It's for them. I don't want them to have to go back and forwards again.
So tell us, what role does music play in this healing process for these children?
Well, I think I agree with all the comments from Erika and others. I think that we are dealing with deep, profound human things here. Music is probably one of the most important things in our lives, and certainly came to human beings before language. In other words, it makes, it's very obvious that we feel things through it that we don't otherwise. But specifics, there are some very simple practical things. For example, for children with trauma, very often there are physical things that happen. So for example, heart rate usually is raised. The autonomic system goes onto high alert. Your heart rate goes up to maybe 5 or 6 beats a minute faster than it would normally be. And that's a lot for an average heart rate. And one of the beautiful things about music is it is hugely interactive with the autonomic nervous system, with the part of our nervous system that controls the heart. And with music, we can actually exercise the autonomic system in such a way as to improve that situation, to release the children from that locked high level of tone in the sympathetic division of the system. We can do things about that. Simple things like breathing. Often traumatized children have difficulty breathing. I'm sorry, this is not a nasty mimicking, just to give you an idea of the kind of halting of breath that can take place. That's the vagal nerve, and the distress leads to that. And of course, the magical way of dealing with that is music. Not only because music unconsciously controls breathing, there's a connection between music and the oldest part of our brain, medulla oblongata. The music works with the neurons in the back of the brain to help us regulate breathing, but also singing. When we're sitting here now, we're using maybe 15–20% of our lungs. There's only one human activity that gives us full use of our lungs, it's singing and playing the oboe. And the way that we can use that to help children get their breath control, well, it works very, very well. Movement, children are with trauma are either hyperactive or sluggish, or a mixture of the two. Music is a great way of helping children to move. If they're being really hyperactive, we meet them there with kick-ass high rhythm music, West African music, and goodness knows what, get them moving. And then we'll lead them back to somewhere gentler. And if they're sluggish, we'll go with the gentlest and help them to come from that place to something more active. Finally, the chemistry of trauma is such that it changes body's chemistry, and music is hugely interactive with the body's chemistry. I mean, this is something we've only known for the last about 20 years, but the medieval philosophers and things knew it, but we somehow forgot it and found it again through science, that music is very interactive with the chemistry of our emotions. That's why we feel so much in music, and therefore when we are feeling things through pain and so on, well, music can help us feel them in a better way. It can lead our feelings to better places, or even take us to dark places safely. Sadness in music is very important. We need sadness, but we need to be safe in our sadness. And music offers us safe sadness. So all of these things make it tremendous. And I haven't even begun to talk about self-respect, communication, empathy, trust, all of those things that music brings to kids. So that's what it can do.
How did you get started on all this? Because I understand there was some inspiration from a Holocaust experience or impact that actually turned you in this direction.
Yes, it was. It was a very specific moment in my life. It was 50 years ago. And I had been a student in Poland because there'd been a very interesting, music movement and theatre music movement there, a theatre movement. And I, with friends, friend of the doctor was taking me around southeast of Poland just to show me villages, forests. It's rather pretty. And it's the old Stettler land as well. It has great sort of associations. And then we came to a clearing in the forest. I will not go to the details, are too cruel because, and it's maybe not right, there may be people who have relatives who perished in Bełżec. It was Bełżec and 500,000 people died there. And the events of the day made me ill. And I went back and I was ill several days. And during that illness, I came to a conclusion. A young man made a vow. I am not standing by if something like that happens in my lifetime. I'm not. So that was the beginning. And that's what took me to the Bosnian genocide, for example, and to others. So it was a huge, another inspiration on this day, huge inspiration, a very important one, is kind of mentors that I wished I'd have known, but obviously couldn't know. In the work I do, I was looking for, mentors, precedents. I'm doing this work, who's done this before and how did they do it? And two really outstanding figures. One is Henryk Goldschmidt from Warsaw, who is known popularly by his pen name, Janusz Korczak, and his wonderful work in the Warsaw Ghetto and his courageous work. He could have been rescued. There were many attempts, but he did not. He stayed with his children, and his use of things like Tagore's The Post Office to prepare the children for death. These are things that I found, not that luckily I'm not preparing children for death in my work and preparing them for life, but the power of that was very important. Another figure who is much forgotten, but I think is a great artistic figure, Friedel Dicke-Brandeisova, the artist who looked after children in Theresienstadt. And created this wonderful artwork and therapeutic methods using breath as well. And we learned a lot from Friedel. I still want to make a film about her. Oh yes, because she was the lost woman of modernism too. I mean, a wonderful artist, working with Paul Klee and you name it, Kurt Weill, a wonderful artist. So two very, very important inspirations, important to mention on this day. I wish I'd have known them, but I celebrate them, and they gave me a lot of courage in doing this work.
Yes, they're amazing figures, which we can all go and read up about after this, I think. I certainly wanted to learn more about them myself. We have an extract of one of your pieces, which is called, it has a Spanish sounding title, it's called Preludio y Canción.
Yes.
Tell us about this piece.
Yeah, okay, well, this is interesting. It's somehow relevant to this evening. It's an excerpt from an opera that I have written with the writer Ariel Dorfman, the Chilean-American writer. And this is a story that I was working with Ariel on a piece called The Widows, which was both a book and a play with Tony Kushner written. And I was starting work as an opera with Ariel, and he wrote to me and said, "Stop." I said, "Why? It's going well." He said, "Stop, don't write Widows." Okay, I said, but he said, "I've got the opera for you." And he had a friend, had a child called Nachiketa, an Indian family, and it had sent Ariel looking at the story of Nachiketa. And it's the story of a boy who comes into the world, and to cut a long story short, Ariel Dorfman takes the boy into the modern world, from the Upanishads, from ancient Indian history, into the problems that children have in the world today, child prostitution, boy soldiers, and things. I mean, the populations I find some of my time working with. And so anyway, one of these episodes, it's in India, it's in Africa, and of course, part of it's in South America, and among people who have lost their families and those who disappeared in Chile. So anyway, this is the excerpt I think you're going to have is a little bit more, not exactly call it upbeat, but one of the more cheerful episodes from this part of the opera.
Great. Tariq, can we have the extract of Nigel's piece, please? That's a really beautiful piece, Nigel. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here and talking to us today. I hope that everything can resume soon and that you can get back to this extraordinary work that you've been doing. So please stay with us, don't go away, because the next extract is going to be from our last speaker's organization, In Place of War. Ruth Daniel is director of In Place of War, and it's all about setting up cultural projects in locations that are troubled by conflict or deprivation and harnessing the power of music and theatre. I believe we've got a video clip to show something of the work that she's been doing.
In Place of War at this point in time is our hope. It's basically the only hope we have.
But there it is, In Place of War, we're like, blow, there you go.
What has happened today, it's amazing. It's beyond my expectation.
Having a space where young people can go is key to their future.
People have amazing ideas and they are young and vivacious. I think it's crucial to have such spaces.
The purpose of this course is just to equip the entrepreneurs and people who want to see change in their community to be the people that they want to be.
This whole collaboration was brought together by In Place of War. It's really important, it's really dope.
Life is really difficult for local artists, but In Place of War, we came through with the intention of spreading a good vibe through the name of music.
It matters. It's so massively important in the communities that we work in.
This has been the most amazing journey for me. So a big thank you, and I'm very happy.
Hear me with my freestyle flying eye like a kite, only star in the sky.
Thank you very much. And Ruth, very, very warm welcome to this evening. Thank you for joining us. Tell us something more about this extraordinary organization. How did you begin? How did it gather momentum, and where do you go?
So we've been around for about 17 years, and kind of, I guess unusually, we began our work at the University of Manchester with a research question. So it was essentially a research project led by a professor called Professor James Thompson, who's an applied theatre academic. And I guess his question generally was, do people make art when bombs are dropping on their heads? And if they do, why is art so important in the most challenging of times? And I think this has been echoed in the conversations by our panelists today, this idea of healing and the idea of that Erika talked about, and the idea of art bringing hope. And I guess through this initial research project, we found that art is always being made in all circumstances. We found this very much in the pandemic, people who maybe have never made art before are all of a sudden writing poetry or writing music. And I think the purpose of that art changes very much depending on the place that the conflict is in. Through this initial work, we became connected to amazing, what we call change makers around the world, who are using arts and creativity to make positive change in their communities. So using the arts to, for example, engage people away from gangs, using the art to rebuild and reimagine what their communities can look like after a war happens, and really using the arts as a way to engage people in that process. So our organisation works to support those change makers and give them the resources, the connections, the networks, the support they need to amplify the impact of their work. And I was struck while people were talking, and some of the things that people were talking about reminded me of a quote which I'd like to read from one of our change makers, a guy called Laurent Cassindi, who's based in the Congo. And when I asked him what art means for him and why it's important, he says, art helps people forget about the conflict. Art helps you change perceptions about others. With art, you can call on people's emotions. And with the arts, you can create dreams. You can disconnect from the bad things around yourself and imagine a different world. And I think for me, those 4 points kind of resonate through all of the work we do within Place of War. That really ripples that idea of being able to think beyond your situation, because when you're in the middle of a conflict and you're dealing with the challenges of that, it's very hard, I think, to even begin to think about the future. And so our organisation is one that kind of transforms cultures of violence and suffering into hope, opportunity and freedom. And the kind of sentence that, or the words that underpin our organisation is creativity conquers conflict. We believe that is possible, and that's what we sort of strive to make happen.
Can you give us some examples of where you've been and what sort of results you've seen coming out of this work so far?
Yeah, so for me, my journey started, I guess, when I went to a place called Medellin in Colombia. This is a place that's been affected by gang war for many, many decades. And a place where really as a young person, you really, if you're from the neighborhoods, the comunas in Medellin, your only opportunity really is to be in a gang. And when I went there many, many years ago, and I was very young, the life expectancy of a person from a comuna was to the age of 21 years old. There was a saying, we were born to die in Medellin. And most people there are engaged in gangs. And then I met a guy called MC Looper, and he said, if it wasn't for hip hop, I would be dead. Hip hop gave me another option, and I'm truly thankful for that. And this was an example of where in a whole city, a whole community had basically decided they wanted an alternative to being in gangs. And they'd used hip hop as the mechanism to kind of engage people away from gangs. So it started out with people breakdancing on the streets, people rapping around cars and around stereos. And then it kind of spread across the whole city. So now in every single community across the city, there are hip hop schools where you can go and learn the different arts, the different forms of hip hop, and become engaged away from being in a gang. And there are 2,500 hip hop groups across the city. And it literally is the difference between life and death. And for me, this was a moment where I kind of thought, I love music. I love making music. I love I had a record label, I loved going to music festivals, I love clubbing, but this was a moment where I felt music can do something else. So that was kind of the beginning of my journey, but we work in 26 countries, primarily across Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. And we do things like build music studios right in the middle of conflict zones. The idea is to engage people away from the conflict and give them the opportunity to express themselves and maybe understand what's happening using music as the mechanism to do that. We have education and entrepreneurial programs which essentially help people use their creativity to design their future and their opportunity and what that looks like. And then I guess the final thing we do within Place of War is about giving a platform to people in the world who don't get the opportunity to tell their stories and use music as the mechanism to do that. And I think probably my favourite project in this area is called Girl, so it's GRRRL. We work with a collective of women artists from conflict zones based across the planet, and pre-COVID we'd bring them together in a music studio somewhere in the world, and they would create music together as women, women of colour, women of different ages, women of different shapes and sizes, and they would create this amazing music, and then we would put them on the biggest festival platforms in the world to headline those festivals. They closed the closing ceremony of the Commonwealth Games, and really they're telling their stories as women to a global audience and to a global platform. And really, you know, the idea is using music to engage people and involve them in what the struggle of women could be, particularly the struggle of women from conflict zones. So there are a few examples of what we do.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think a lot of people listening are probably going to be very inspired by everything you have said, everything that our panelists tonight have been talking about. Ruth, what advice would you give people who are thinking, I want to go and do that, I want to get involved?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what we do, we're always on the lookout for people to come and help and be involved in lots of different ways. So you can always visit our website, which is inplaceofwar.net, and you know, you can learn a little bit more about what we do and ways to be involved. But there are other organisations that work with the arts and creativity around the world, and I think engaging with them, recognising that the arts is a powerful tool, and being an ambassador for that, I think is kind of an easy thing that everybody can do. You know, the arts is amazing on so many levels, but it does save people's lives and it does change people's lives. And I think, you know, being an ambassador in that sense is also a really powerful thing.
Absolutely. Well, this is, I think I'm getting the feeling we could carry on talking about these things all evening. I'm curious to know from Wesley if anyone in the audience has been sending in questions.
Yes, we have one question from Dennis Connolly. He says, I've often composed a piece where I don't have a clue where it came from. I just follow my instincts and I dare to say it's a voice inside my head saying, try this. It's only later that I realized that it means something that I didn't understand at the time of writing. Do you as guests experience this when you're composing?
Nigel, do you fancy taking that?
Yes, I can make a start. Yes, if I'm lucky, I think that's a blissful state to be in. Most of the time, I find myself being too conscious as a composer. And it's good to know the names of the trees in the forest, of course it is. But sometimes I'd like to be released from that knowledge and just explore a forest without tree names. And sometimes I think that's a very special moment. If that happens, that you find yourself making something, you don't know where it's from, you don't know what it is, and then you realize it has some value. I think those are the blessed moments for a composer, the best moments.
Mm-hmm. Erika, yeah. Does this ring any bells for you?
I'm sorry?
Does this question ring any bells for you? The matter of where inspiration comes from. You might be creating a piece that just comes to you and you don't know where it comes from.
Well, probably nearly everything I've ever written has been like that. I mean, yes, when I've had a commission from certain people, then the group itself, a player or players, have been an inspiration in that I know what they do, what they can do, and it's wonderful to hear it in one's head and to use that as part of one's work. But actually, I never really know where things come from. Sometimes just reading something. I love poetry, and reading poetry is often an inspiration for me, even if the work doesn't arise out of a particular piece of poetry at all. But some of my music has been inspired by certain poems, and pictures too. I mean, I love art, and very often, particularly contemporary art, I find that an inspiration often, the way things are placed. And I'm interested in line more than color. I love color too, but the placing of things on a page is often an inspiration for me. To write music. I mean, it often happens like that, but sometimes I don't know at all.
Yeah, great. And Debbie, your work is very much focused on film, and you're responding to particular tasks. Do you have the chance to write from pure inspiration like this?
Yes, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to write away from films as well and do albums and specific projects for musicians. But I think it's sort of what Nigel and Erika have said, that if you get into a project, and some of it is, I just loved your idea of not knowing the names of the trees, you know, that was just such a lovely way of putting it. But of course, you know, we all know the notes and the scales and, you know, the sort of the names of the notes and the structure, and you might be writing for a flute, and so you know the range of the flute, or you're writing at a piano and you've got your notes in front of you. So that's all there, and those are the tools of all our trade. But it's that moment, and sometimes it is just about doing it. It's just about the technical thing of getting it down and writing the music. And that, you know, my composition teacher was Buxton Orr, and he taught me to write something every day, so that you have plenty of ideas and you never run out of ideas. And that was very good, especially when you're working on a project with a deadline. But it's that occasional moment, and it is a blessing, as Nigel said, when it happens, that it just for some reason arrives on the page in your head for whatever reason. And you know, we might call it inspiration or fluke or luck or whatever we want to call it, but it's that fantastic. And it has happened occasionally, and you just sit down and it's there for whatever, and who knows why, but it is a magical moment. And I try not to analyze it too much, because whatever it is that makes you write music, for fear it might go away if you analyze it too much. And I think the best thing, and any advice to anyone listening who has this thought, is just to enjoy those moments when they happen. Don't analyze it too much. A lot of the time it's technical. 90% of the time I think it is more of a technical exercise that you have to just get the work done. But there is this wonderful thing called inspiration.
Well, all of you are an inspiration to all the rest of us. I'm terribly aware that we've run way over time. Yeah. I'm sorry, Wesley, I'm sure it's all my fault. But it's just wonderful to have the opportunity to talk to such an extraordinarily enlightening group of people with such wonderful perspectives on everything that today means to us. And let's not forget, it's not only Holocaust Memorial Day, it's also Mozart's birthday. And I'm really sorry we can't just go to the pub and continue this down there, but I want to thank you all so much for taking part tonight, and to all our audience for joining us and staying with us. And thank you, Wesley, for having us.
And thank you very, very much. All of you.
I'd like
it's been absolutely marvelous, really. It's been a real treat, absolute treat. Thank you very, very much, every single one of you.
And Nigel too, and Ruth, and of course yourself, Jessica, for giving up your time to be with us this evening. And thank you to the audience for sticking around and seeing it through to the end. A huge thank you also goes to my Ivors Academy colleague, Tariq, for helping out behind the scenes with all the technical stuff, the audio, the video. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation with our composers this evening, and that you will be able to join us again for one of our online events throughout the year. Further details will be available on the Ivors Academy website, and access to that information will be on our event pages. Thank you very much indeed, and have a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.